When I get to spend time talking about families or family systems, when I have the opportunity to speak to the main assembly, I like to talk about a systems approach to the church. And the church is never described in Scripture as an organization. It is only ever described as an organism. We keep that in mind as elders, that we are not administering a organization, you're shepherding an organism. That's very, very important. So when Paul approaches the problems at Corinth, and the letter to the Corinthians is just that. Paul's got a bullet list, and he says, you've talked about this, this, and this. I'm going to address this, this, and this. And in this particular usage, Paul uses a concept that I call corporate individuality. What the young man read is illustrative of that. Corporate individuality, it's an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp, Kentucky football, stuff that doesn't go together. But what he's saying is that we're part of a large group, but we have an individual responsibility, individual focus. So what is my role? What is my connection to the body? And this is a great case study for this, because when you get to the city of Corinth in the first century, you have 250,000 free people. The city of Huntsville has 200,000 people. This is larger than the city of Huntsville. 250,000 free people, 400,000 slaves. Your slaves outnumber your free people maybe almost 2 to 1. Imagine going to church and you sit in your assembly and there's an owner and the owned. Imagine 10 years down the road and slavery was sort of like a job. You had bond servants and other kinds of, and so a slave could be married. 10 years down the road in the city of Corinth, you've got a guy who's a Christian, his wife's a Christian, his children are Christian, and he's a slave and he's qualified to be an elder. You submit to an elder who's a slave? You submit to an elder who's poor? You submit to an elder who's different from you culturally? Not only do you have the slaves and the free happening in Corinth, you have the Jews and the Greeks, the Jews and the Gentiles. The Jews come out of this history with the law of Moses and their interpretation of it into Judaism, and they had some very strict food laws, things that they considered to be unclean. In general terms, the Levitical system would have treated any animal that was a predator or a scavenger as unclean. And that's very generic, but it looks to me like when I read that, there's some kind of prohibition about that animal rending or tearing flesh. And so God would not allow them to eat things that ate other things that were dead or things that had been torn or carrion. So they couldn't eat anything that was a predator or scavenger. The exemption to that would be in the water, because anything in the water that had fins or scales they could eat. But all fish are usually predator fish. But a bass eats its prey whole. It doesn't rend the flesh or tear the flesh, and it's never a scavenger. But they couldn't eat shellfish, they couldn't eat eel, they couldn't eat catfish, they couldn't eat shrimp, they couldn't eat turtle, couldn't eat frog legs, that kind of stuff. And so they came into this idea that somehow their righteousness with God was connected with their purity of their food. And I've got a little bit of a restricted diet. I've had some adventures with my digestive system and some surgeries and stuff. And I'm not supposed to eat some things, but the things that I'm not supposed to eat, I like. I've never seen a Krispy Kreme donut I couldn't be friends with. I'll tell you straight up. If you allow me to say, okay, Lonnie, it's not going to hurt you, it's not going to bother you, and when I travel, I usually hyper exercise before I come so that I can eat what I like. But if you just said today is a free day for you, I'd get a Krispy Kreme donut. I'd put a pat of butter on it. I'd heat it in the microwave. I'd take a Wendy's Frosty and dump it in the middle. I'd squirt honey on it and I'd eat it. But I've never, but a Jewish person saw something that was unclean, he'd go, man, that's nasty. That's roadkill. The Gentiles didn't have those restrictions. They ate a lot of blood. They ate things that were unclean to a Jew. Can you imagine potluck Sunday at Corinth? You know, a guy walks in with that Gentile and, you know, the Jews were like throwing up. That would have been imagine, hey, we're going to invite you over to our house. What are you having? Even down to, was this meat used in a temple service with an idol? God told Moses, when you build an altar, you don't approach it with steps, you approach it with a ramp, lest the nakedness of your priest become uncovered. The Jews took that to heart, and they were hyper modest. If you read in the New Testament that a Jewish man ran, that's really out of flavor. That was a faux pas, because they had to pull their robes up to run, and they would not expose the lower half of their body. So their modesty issues, men and women, covered from shoulders all the way down to the floor. Gentiles didn't have those kind of issues. The Greek word gymnos means naked. And when they worked out, they were in the nude. When they played the Isthmian games on the Isthmus of Corinth, and they showed up for those precursors, everybody that ran a race, threw a shot put, wrestled, or anything else, they were absolutely naked. You got these people who are hyper modest, and these folks who really don't, you know, you think Under Armour is a little bit uncomfortable, you'd given good money for a pair of Under Armour at the Corinthian Games, I'll tell you right now. So, tongue in cheek, the guy gets up on, okay, the youth group is going to play flag football on Saturday. No, the Jewish kids won't play on Saturday. We have to play on Sunday. And remember, no shorts. The Jewish kids go, yeah, we'll wear our robes. The Gentile kids, no problem. And then you show up and it's a mess. And these people are trying to worship together and serve God with their culture and their background and owners and owned. And so when Paul talks to them, he's basically going to give this discussion about a body. He talks head body stuff, Ephesians 4 and Romans 12 and here. And really what he's going to do is he's going to say there's three absolutely hyperbolic, ridiculous situations that should never take place in a body. And from that description, we're going to come up with some conclusions, some positive statements. As he starts this discussion, he'll start out discussing different but same. Listen as he talks about different but same, and then he'll swap to many but one. 1 Corinthians 12:4. There are differences. There are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are differences of ministries, but the same Lord. There are diversities of activities, but the same God who works all in all. The manifestation of the Spirit is given each one for the profit of all. For to one, now he's going to individualize the gifts. For the one is given wisdom through the Spirit, to another the word of knowledge through the Spirit, through the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, different, same, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues, but one and the same Spirit works in all these things, distributing each one individually as He wills. You got these big groups of people, they got these different things, but they come from the same Spirit. And then He swaps. Different, same, many, but one. For as the body is one, but has many members, but all of the members of that body being many are one, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into the body. Now, just for fun, if the body's the church and the church is the body, how do you get in the body? You're baptized. That's a slam dunk. Anybody wants to talk to you about the necessity of baptism, say, how did those Corinthians get into the body? They were baptized. What's the body? The body's the church. Can you be in the body without being baptized? No. Can you be in the church without being baptized? No. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether, and that's not a word I use in normal conversation, so I've sort of retranslated that into Alabama English. Whether there means it don't matter. For by one Spirit we're all baptized into one body, and it don't matter if you're a Jew or a Greek, a slave or a free. There's our four categories. There's what Paul's talking about. You got Jews and Gentiles, slaves and free, and Paul says you're baptized into this body, and it doesn't matter whether you're Jew or Greek, whether you're slave or free. We've all been made to drink of the same Spirit. But in fact, the body is not one member, but many. So now as a member of that body, what am I supposed to do? As a member of that body, what's my role? What's my function? Marlon Conley from over at Lipscomb used to teach on this text, and he talked about the difference between a PET scan and a different kind of scan. One scan shows form, one scan shows function. This is function scan. You know, not an X-ray. I can see your bones. This is I can see a PET scan. I can see the functionality of your organs. For in fact, the body is not one member but many. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I'm not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I'm not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? The first thing he says is, you can't say because I don't like my role or I don't like my job, I'm not going to play. If one of your body members checked out on you, what would happen? If you've ever had to wear a cast, or you slip on your hand wrong and then try to answer your iPhone. You beat that touch screen to death because that hand's asleep. If you've ever had to function with a misuse of an eye because they dilated and gave you a patch. If one of your body members says, you won't let me be an elder, you won't let me lead singing, I'm done, I quit. What would happen to the body's functionality if a member decided not to function? What's the most important part of your car? If you're a teenage girl, it's the brake, pedal on the left. My daughter used to drive that little Toyota, and we live out in the country, and we live on Gurley Pike. And she'd go around those corners and get this close to a mailbox. Then I'd make her cut the grass, and she'd get this far away from the fence. I said, look, I can live in either world, okay? But I got to have consistency. Either give the mailbox some room or give the fence some room, or get as close to the fence as you do to the mailboxes. We could argue about automotives. We talk about shocks and steering wheel and fuel injectors and universal joints and alternators. If you're driving down 77 over here, you get a pop-up thunderstorm and you don't have a $7 piece of rubber that does this, you'll park that car. The most important part of your car is the part you need to be working that's not working. Functionality in the body is, are you doing your job? Whatever it is, sometimes it's just to show up. Sometimes it's just to add your voice. Sometimes it's just to add your presence. Sometimes it's to contribute your money. Sometimes it's to participate in a service project or evangelism or looking for the homeless and the poor. But you can't say, hey, I don't like my job, I quit. My daughter played volleyball during high school and college. And she wanted me to make, I'd make t-shirts sometimes. I have an airbrush and have sold artwork. I have a minor in art. And she said, Dad, I want you to make me a shirt that says there is no I in team, but there is in unity. And in the shape of a volleyball, I want the words, I hustle, I care, I show up, I practice, I cry, I dig, I pass. Because although there's no I in team, an individual on that team has a job to do. And if you don't do your job, number one, it doesn't get done. Number two, it affects the team. So when Paul says you can't have this ridiculous situation in the body where one member says, I'm done, what he's telling us is I must accept my responsibility. Second ridiculous situation. Verse 17, if the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole body were hearing, where would be the smelling? But now God has set the members, each one of them, in the body just as he pleased. And if they were all one member, where would the body be? But now indeed there are many members, yet one body. Second ridiculous situation that Paul says can't take place in the body is you can't just be one thing. If you were just an eye or just an ear or just a hand, you'd be a mutant. You'd be a monster. Now, if you were just an eye, it would work when you look at that teenage girl and say, don't roll that eye at me. But other than that, it would have no function. It would be ridiculous. And you can't all be elders and deacons and preachers and song leaders. We can't all be male or female. And in fact, those distinctions, those differences give us true functionality. Jackie and I moved to Huntsville, Alabama in 1986. We moved there from Salem, Arkansas, and very small town, very, very little rural place. And we moved to this sort of metropolitan city. I was 21 when we moved, turned 22 that first month or two we were there. And one morning after church, a lady came up and said, you're supposed to eat dinner at our house. I thought it was going to be a long afternoon because when I was growing up, we ate dinner after dark, but she meant lunch. But anyway, so we're going to do dinner at our house, so we go with them. The lady that invited us to her house was Mary Chun. Her husband was the executive vice president for Chrysler when Chrysler had that big plant in Huntsville. So we go over to their house, and as we walk into the house, Sister Chun announces, we're going to have dinner in the formal dining room. Now, growing up in Oxford, Alabama, I didn't have a formal dining room. We had a room we ate in, and occasionally we ate in the other room with TV trays so we could watch the black and white TV. Never heard of a formal dining room, never been in a formal dining room. We turn the corner, and there's the formal dining room. And it's this immaculately set hardwood table, and there's fat spoons and skinny spoons and 3-pronged forks and 4-pronged forks and sharp knives and dull knives and butter knives and serrated knives and cups and glasses and saucers. And I thought, are we going to eat or are we going to fight? There's enough weapon on this table, I could take over a small third world country. Jackie leans into my ear and says, "You will not embarrass me." I look at her and say, "Well, what do you think I'm going to do?" She said, "You eat what Miss Chun eats with what Miss Chun eats it with." I said, "What if I don't like it?" She said, "You refer back to rule 1. You will not embarrass me." So I sat down at this table and watched our hostess, and it's pretty, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. Start on the outside, work on the inside, and it worked. Why in the world do you put all that stuff on the table? You ever tried to eat soup with a fork? You ever tried to eat a tough steak with a spoon? They tell about a guy in Arkansas who ate honey and peas. And they said, "Why do you put honey on your peas?" He said, "It doesn't taste very good, but it keeps them on my knife." Well, now you understand that these things have functions. And if you didn't have those different things, you couldn't do those different jobs. And God has set the members as it pleased Him. I've got a function to do. I've got a job to do. And we get so wrapped up, especially teenagers, we get wrapped up in what we're not rather than discovering what we are. I got invited to do a project in Huntsville, and we built an indoor climbing wall at a local community center, and I donated some time to do some experiential programming with them. Rock climbing is about making decisions. It's about sequencing. We do a thing about trusting your anchor, all kind of cool stuff. And one of the things we do in the class is we teach the children a skill called belaying, B-E-L-A-Y. It's a sailing term, means to hold a rope. But all amateur rock climbers top rope. So if you could expose the beam that runs down the center of this building and toss a rope over it, tie that rope to the harness of a climber, and then run it through my harness with a friction brake. As they go up, I pull in the slack, and that protects them. The rope gets shorter as you go to the top. That's called top roping, as opposed to actual lead climbing, where the rope gets longer as you go up. And when Troy and I climb, we lead some stuff. But we teach the kids how to do that, and we teach them to belay. They have to belay each other, and then on the 4th class, they have to belay one of their parents, which makes for a very interesting discussion. Hey, why were you screaming at your dad? Well, he was up off the ground, and he had a foothold, and he wouldn't listen to me, and I was scared. Welcome to parenting. You were in charge of your dad for about a minute, and you like to lost your mind. He's been that way about you since you took your first breath. If he gets a little psychotic when you play t-ball, give him a break. If he goes out of his mind when you want to get in a car with a boy and go somewhere, you now know that feeling just a little bit. This particular class they sent me one year, a bunch of 7th graders, a little guy in the class named Chris, only had one arm. I don't know why they thought climbing was his sport. We took a wrench and manipulated some of the climbing holes so that he could actually do some climbing. And so we're teaching belaying, and I've got ropes hanging from the ceiling. We've got buckets of water. You have to raise the water up and lower it without spilling any water. That way you're not shock loading anybody as you lower them to the ground. And we're working all this stuff out, and somebody tugs my harness. Mr. Lonnie, I need to learn to belay. I look over my shoulder, and it's Chris, the one-armed kid. And I go, "Well, Chris, normally people use 2 hands to belay." And Chris said, "Well, normally I just have one." Okay. And then he says this to me, little African-American guy, 7th grade, about my height. Looked me dead in the eye. Said, do not tell me what people with 2 hands can do. Tell me what I can do with the 1 hand I've got. And let me tell you, outside of this book, that's one of the 2 most significant things ever said to me in my life. Don't tell me what people with 2 hands can do. Tell me what I can do with this 1 hand I've got. I'm not supposed to be like you. You're taken. You're not supposed to be like me. I'm taken. Don't tell me what people taller than me do. What can a guy my height do? Don't tell me what somebody younger than me can do. What can I do at my age? Don't tell me what somebody older than me can do. What can I do with what I've got? Don't tell me what a 1,500 member church with 3 trail race buses can do. What can I do with these 300 people in a 15-passenger van? And all of a sudden, when we recognize I'm not supposed to be like you, the body has diversity, and it has diversity for a reason, because God set us on his table and went, I like that. And you need to like the place in the body you're at. So number 1, accept your responsibility. Number 2, accept your limitations. And then number 3, verse 21, and the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. Nor again the head to the feet, I don't need you. No, much rather, the members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary, and those members of the body that we think are less honorable, on these we bestow greater honor, and our unpresentable parts have greater modesty. But our presentable parts have no need. But God composed the body, having given greater honor to that part which lacks it, that there should be no schism, that word means division, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And if one body member suffers, they all suffer with it. And if one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. What Paul says here is, you can't have a body member that looks at another body member and say, we don't need you, you're not important. You can't have that happen. Not because of age, not because of strength, not because of wealth, not because of color. You can't have a body member look at another body member and say, you're unimportant. In fact, he says what the body members do is they have the same care one for another. We used to call that on the ropes course interdependence. There's you've got dependence where I can't move unless you tell me to. There's independence. I'm the Lone Ranger and I do my own thing. And there's interdependence. And I asked a group on the ropes course, a bunch of kids from Athens Bible School, their volleyball team came to. I said, let's define interdependence. And this little girl said, we depend with each other. I like that. Not we depend on each other, but we depend with each other. We rejoice when one member rejoices. We hurt when the other members hurt. We have the same care one for another. Mark Sanborn in his corporate team building says it's 3 components: attention, belonging, and support. Now, if you want to know whether or not you've got a strong congregation, you ask those 3 words sometimes. You tell everybody, get out a visitor's card, write down these 3 words: attention, belonging, and support. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, how much attention do you get from this group? How much belonging do you get from this group? How much support do you get from this group? Add your numbers up, do your math, you'll give yourself an A, B, or a C, depending on your percentages. Now, to be fair, 2 weeks later, get up in the pulpit and say, hey, everybody get a visitor's card. Write down these 3 words: attention, belonging, and support. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, how much attention did you give somebody? How much belonging do you give somebody? How much support do you give somebody? And you'll find out that the people who think it's important to give it also think it's important to get it, and vice versa. And you'll find the folks who don't feel like they get it usually don't give it either. And that's a pretty interesting play, is that you give attention, belonging, and support. In his book, The Lunch Ladies, Philip Jenkins talks about attention, belonging, and support on steroids. It's how a congregation of young people begins to give to each other. So Paul says, here's the thing: you accept your responsibility, you accept your limitations, and number 3, you accept one another. And then verse 27, he comes the closest he's going to come to using the word corporate individuality. Now, you are the body of Christ, but members individually. I've got to see myself as connected to you through Christ. It has nothing to do with our horizontal connection. It has everything to do with our vertical connection. I'm connected to you because you're connected to Christ. You're connected to Christ, therefore you're connected to me. And that's really changing. We talked to the young people yesterday about a spiritual self-concept. Now, he'll go through a lot of other stuff, and really what he's going to boil down to is he'll say in chapter 13, it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't do it because of love, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what your function is in this church. If you don't love one another, it doesn't. And here's how he describes that. You are the body of Christ and members individually. Jackie and I got married. I was 21, she was 18. My mom and dad basically inherited a teenage girl. So we would, she'd come to Thanksgiving and Christmas and we'd visit and we'd go on family vacations. My brother didn't get married till he was 39. He's older than me and waited, and then he starts showing up at these family events with this girl named Missy. Now, my wife grew up in Velvet Ridge, Arkansas, rode a dirt bike, swam in the creek, picked blueberries for a living, helped with her grandfather's cattle. She can plow behind a real plow with a mule. Missy thinks Roughing It is a Holiday Inn without a pool. She doesn't like to get dirty. She's a nice lady, but we just didn't really know her. Jackie kind of grew up with our family, and then this intruder shows up with my brother. When they got married, they were standing on the big stage at University Church, and they said, and there's a big air vent there. And the guy said, "Are there rings present during the rehearsal?" Well, I reached in my coat and pulled out a penny and dropped it down that vent. Ding, 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 ding. I thought it was hilarious. Missy was not amused. I mean, that ship has sailed, brother. That was not good. Then they started having kids, and they were in that generation where their younger friends were naming their children those exotic names like Armoire Chippendale and stuff like that. I contributed my idea. I said, if you have a little girl, her first name needs to be Enya. Her middle name needs to be Anna. She'd be Enya Anna Jones. I thought that was just... in fact, I thought about renaming my daughter that. I mean, that's money right there. Again, not very impressive to Missy. I'm having some fun at Missy's expense. Let me go on record. She doted on Lonnie Beth when Lonnie Beth was tiny. She treats my parents like she treats her parents. She's a lovely, gracious person. She's a wonderful hostess. But my personal opinion of Missy really doesn't matter. On record, I love her to death. But it doesn't matter because she's connected to my brother. And because she's my brother's wife, she's connected to me. Personal politics, personal taste, anything else really doesn't matter because she is my brother's wife. She has importance in my life. That grandson that came into the world yesterday is my daughter's son. That's all that matters. I don't know this kid. He's never said a word or done anything but breathe and poop right now. That's it. But he's connected to me because he's connected to her. When I look at this audience and say, I'm connected to that young man because he's connected to Christ. And I'm connected to this gentleman because he's connected to Christ. If I were going out of town to do a corporate event, Jackie wants to know, who's the host, who's the contact, what's your hotel number, where's your GPS location, how can I get a hold of you? She says, where are you going this weekend? I said, I'm speaking to a church in South Carolina. She says, you're with Christians, they'll take care of you. She don't worry about it. You're connected to Christ, you're connected to me. And if we ever change our schemata to understand that's what the body's about, we're connected simply because of our mutual love for Christ, then I accept my responsibility, I accept my limitations, and we accept one another. 2 quick questions this morning, and I've abused your time, but that gentleman said I didn't have to worry about it. Are you a member of the body? If you're not a member of the body, by faith, repentance, confession, and baptism, you die to self, you're buried in water, and you're raised, and you're a member of that body. Number 1, if you're not a member of the body, don't leave this building without taking care of that, because without being a member of the body, you still have a sin problem. Question number 2, if you're a member of the body, have you accepted your responsibility? Dealing with your limitations, have you accepted others? Are you a functional part of the body? And if not, the body needs you to change that so the body can reach its potential. If there's any need you have this morning to be a member of the body or a more functional member of the body, let us address that with you in prayer or study or baptism, and that invitation is open while we stand and while we sing.